I'm Donnie, and you are amazing. Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And you are being that change every single day. You are changing the world by changing the worldview. Gandhi's spiritual successor, Vinoba Bhave, also sought to change the world. He did an experiment in 1951 when India was going through a whole challenge in terms of land inequalities, where he went around and he asked people to gift their land back to people without land. For 2 years he traveled throughout the country with Bhutan, this movement, to see land redistributed. And it was a failure. After 2 years, what happened was that the people who'd been given the land saw their land sold off because they didn't have the skills or they didn't have the interest to continue working the land, so it was returned, sold back to the wealthy again. And this is a little like our economy at the moment, where we have an extractive mechanism that continues throughout the processes of the way we engage with our market economy. We continue to see money and value extracted from the system in a way that's really unhealthy. My question today is, how can we look beyond B Corps to create something more, to create something deeper, to create something that is a truly collaborative, market-based economy? And for me, the answer starts by looking at our monetary system, but looking at the missing piece in terms of my exploration in this field. It was a surprise to me many years ago to discover that money isn't created by governments, it's not created by treasuries, it's largely created by banks around the world. And money enters our system by being loaned into existence. That means that if you take out a mortgage, for example, or a car loan, or you take out some money on a credit card, at the same time you have an equivalent amount of debt that is generated in the system. For every single pesos, dollar, euro you have in your pocket or bank account right now, there must be the equivalent amount of debt somewhere in the system, because money enters the system by being lent into existence. This is fundamentally important to those of us interested in changing the world because of what happens next in our capitalist system. What happens is that the money and the debt typically separate. If you think about when you get a loan for a house, for example, it's one of the most easy ways to consider this because the money immediately goes to pay for someone you are purchasing the house from, for example, and then you are left with the debt plus the interest. And this is what happens in a system that is based on profit maximization, is that money accumulates in the system. And debt has to therefore accumulate somewhere else. Now, if money and debt connect, they can be wiped out. Both of them can not exist further in the system. But when money and debt don't reconnect, you create a system of permanent indebtedness. So if you have an economy that is based on the concentration of money, the private accumulation of money, where money itself becomes a vehicle for making more money and for accumulating more money, then you have a situation where debt can never reconnect with money in a way that they can cancel out. And that's why we have an economy where as the money supply increases around the world, the debt increases as well and even more. Because money is not able to reconnect with debt. The money does not circulate enough through our economy. And the reason that debt is more than the money in terms of global money supply and global debt supply is that you have interest on debt and you have ways of introducing debt into our system that don't involve increasing the money supply, such as bond issuances. The reason I'm starting with this today is because for me, this is one of the biggest blind spots we have with our economy. Not understanding that the $247 trillion that exists in global debt with private individuals, with corporations, and with governments is fundamentally built in to our economy. It's a fundamental, inherent part of the capitalist system, and it will continue to grow. In the past, we had financial crashes, for example, that would wipe out debt because of bankruptcies associated with that. But in 2008, with the financial crises stemming from the US, what happened was that debt actually increased faster than ever. This is because the global network is so connected, we are so interconnected in terms of the economy, that certain businesses are too big to fail. And so they got bailed out. The global capitalist system, whatever reform you might think is possible, whether we think that there is a way to be more philanthropic, whether we think that companies can give back more, let me tell you, there is no way to avoid the impending debt crises that we are facing. Because when money concentrates in the economy, debt has to concentrate elsewhere. The conclusion, therefore, is that profit maximization, which is the primary means by which money accumulates, profit maximization itself equals debt maximization. To grow the economy in a capitalist system, you must grow the debt. It took me many years of going down rabbit holes to understand how finance works, how global economic systems actually operate, to realize this. This system is built on growing debt of individual households, of corporations and governments. And guess who faces that impact the most? It's the households that are marginalized. It's the small businesses. And it's the governments that are beholden to other governments and private corporations around the world. This is the reason that financial inequality exists around the world. The one thing that I learned over the last few years that was a real mind shift to me around this was to distinguish between wealth creation and value creation, wealth and value creation, versus money creation. Because you see, wealth creation and value creation is unlimited. If I come to your property, to your house, etc., and we work together on something, we can create value out of that process. If I run a business and I come and I work in your community, we can create value in that process that has no cap to its potential. But when you put money into a system and it has to be matched by debt, it's a zero-sum game. Someone's gain of money means someone else must take on debt. That's why at the Post-Growth Institute, we're working on full circle economics. So this takes the current conversations around the circular economy, which have been focused a lot on the resource field, and it looks at what does circular value look like? How do we ensure that value that we're creating circulates in the economy? How do we ensure that the things that we're creating are accessible by all in the economy? But it also looks at the circulation of money within the economy. Because let me tell you, no amount of philanthropy, no amount of government regulation can address the siphoning of money that happens in a capitalist system. Because if you think about it, if there was a way that the world's wealthiest, the world's richest could actually be generous enough to give back such that money constantly circulated and debt could be paid down, then you would have no incentive to go into business in a capitalist system. Why would you do it? So what we call for is a new triple bottom line for interdependent flourishing. You may be familiar with the traditional triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. Here we look at people, planet, and not for profit. Now, I know a lot of people in the audience here work with businesses, and they've probably worked with non-profit organizations And my guess is that you might be at the same place that I've been at before, which is to think of non-profit organizations as dependent organizations, ones that depend largely on the charity of the for-profit sector. And so perhaps you see market, government, and the third sector as three separate parts. What I'm here to share is that the not-for-profit field, which includes any business that is without private individual ownership, is so much bigger than you might imagine and circulates so much more money because it's without private individual owners. Take a look at this. Any Barcelona Football Club supporters in the crowd? Well, you may know that Barcelona Football Club is not for profit. It's a consumer cooperative which is governed by the members. It has ownership by the members, but in reality, that ownership doesn't mean you have an equity stake in the business. It means that you are a member of an organization with voting rights. The world's most profitable company, Saudi Aramco, 100% owned by the Saudi government, is not for profit. In terms of it uses the income it generates, goes entirely towards the Saudi budget. Perhaps you didn't know that IKEA is a not-for-profit foundation-run business under the industrial foundation model. Or perhaps you've heard of BRAC, one of the world's largest non-profit organizations that has business activities based underneath it in its work that comes out of Bangladesh. Vinoba Bhave learned something really interesting after those years of traveling through his community. He learned that unless you have an inherent mechanism that governs the way that ownership or custodianship of land and of business occurs, you will always be facing the unhealthy tendencies that can be brought out in individual behavior, to accumulate, to feel scarcity, to feel like there's never enough. So he shifted, he pivoted, and changed his model from Bhudan to Gramdan. From Bhudan, which was the individual's gift, to Gramdan, which was the village gift. And his insight was that instead of private individuals passing land to other private individuals and maintaining that system of private equity, he asks for people to gift, as a village, their land into a village trust, into a not-for-profit structure, into a model of stewardship. And while Gramdan took a hit over the last few decades and is not so strong anymore in India, for many, many decades, it was a powerful model for stewardship of lands within communities, based on this inherent circulation of money, of resources, of value. That's how nature does it. All living systems thrive on circulation, whether it's our blood pumping through our bodies, whether it's nitrogen pumping through the atmosphere and the earth in this cycle. All living systems thrive on circulation, and they die on stagnation. For us to have an economy and a market that is truly collaborative, that isn't fighting against its own interests, that isn't saying, we are about purpose, but not understanding that at the same time, if you have the privatization of wealth, and particularly money, if money is concentrating in your system, you will have a problem. Without understanding that challenge, we are facing a situation that is inherently destructive. But if we understand that all living systems, and therein the greatest economy we can imagine, will thrive on that circulation, then perhaps we can imagine something a little beyond B Corps, given the B Corp model is typically focused on for-profit, private equity-based businesses. There are some not-for-profit examples that include, for example, Beneficial State Bank, Breadstone Bakery, where a foundation owns a B Corp. And my challenge is for us to look at that deeply and to ask, what more can we do in this space to really encourage the world we want? Yes, you are willing to be the change, But are you willing to see what the change really needs to be?